intentionally bringing people from the disability community into Microsoft to work with us on products. That's what this space is for. I think we can always kind of do better. We have a sensory area over here, some kind of desky areas because we're Microsoft and we have desks. We have our Xbox area and couch over here, and some various explorations around like how home use can kind of happen. It's a pretty small space, but it's a nice space. We've got a ton of assistive technology. If Solomon was here, who is the person who runs the lab day to day, I'm one of the founders of the lab. If Solomon was here, he'd show you the bathroom because we have this like adult size raising and lowering changing table. I will show you what I like, which is like my cabinet full of assistive technology, so just a little bit of a taste of the lab. And you can find out more about the lab and kind of, it's pretty much brochureware, but you can find out about that at aka.ms/inclusive tech lab. That'll take you to that. But I'm going to get into my presentation. So I'm going to tell you some stories of, not just adaptive controller stories, but a lot of them are adaptive controller stories. It's called Recognize Exclusion, Design for Inclusion. You may have seen this announcement. We announced this back a few months ago. These are the Microsoft Adaptive Accessories. This is in many ways the spiritual successor to the adaptive controller. This is a set of mouse. It's a mouse, it's a button, it's a hub that can be augmented with 3D printing to kind of build a system of devices that works for individuals. So what we have here in this top corner, these ones with grooves, are because they were designed for a little girl who has cerebral palsy and her fingers tremor. And so the grooves help keep her fingers in place. They add resistance to the mouse button presses because, I think one of the things we think about a lot when we're talking about people with disabilities and computing and device design in general is like, I want lighter presses, I want lighter things, I want everything to be lighter, lighter, lighter. But some folks who can't really control their own muscle tone actually need things to be heavier. They need it actually to be harder to press a key. If you're a hardcore gamer too, you might be into the clickety clacks of like a blue cherry switch on your keyboard or something like that, something that has a lot of resistance. So that's the Microsoft Adaptive Accessories. You'll hear more about that from us soon, but there's a cool announcement video that's online if you wanted to look that up. But I just showed you the lab. These are some folks, sort of participating in the lab. And like I said, we plan to have this space be a place for the disabled community to come work with us at Microsoft. I think we can always do better at that. We try hard to kind of make it happen, but we could always do better. And these are just sort of some still shots of the location, some of the products that we have in here, some of the things that we're exploring. So you can see the jellyfish when it's on in the sensory room, things like that. So I'll give you the sort of boilerplate intro of why do we do this. At Microsoft, we know that there are over 1 billion people in the world with disabilities, and we have a mission to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. And so when we don't intentionally include people with disabilities in the products that we're making, we're actively working against our mission. And so it's really important for us to dig in. That being said, it's really hard. I've been in inclusive design and accessibility for 20 years. I get how hard it is to design something that you might never use, right? It's really, how do you wrap your head around that? So we follow the World Health Organization's definition of disability. They changed it in 2014 from a personal health condition to a mismatch in human interactions between a person and their environment. So what does that mean? If the canonical example is if I'm a wheelchair user and I roll into a building and I need to get to the second floor, and the only way that I can get to the second floor is a set of stairs, it's not the wheelchair that's my disability. It's not the condition that put me in my wheelchair that's the disability. It's the stairs. It's the environment. The environment disabled me. And this is sometimes referred to as the social model of disability. It's not the only model of disability. There are lots of models of disability, and they're all very important. But the social model of disability puts the onus on us as product designers to make sure that we are not disabling people by unintentionally excluding them, right? I know you're not all out there intentionally excluding people, unless, of course, you work in security. And of course you do. This is our Super Bowl ad. I hope you folks have seen it.
My name is Grover.
Sean. My name is Ian.
I'm Taylor.
My name is Owen, and I am 9.5 years old.
I only have one.
And yeah.
I love video games, my friends, my family, and again video games.
Whenever I play it, it makes me feel happy.
The fun that you get to have with connecting with your friends.
You make your own rules?
It's his way of interacting with his friends when he can't physically otherwise do it.
When I'm playing with a regular controller, there's some things that don't work for me.
It's difficult for me to use both joysticks and the D-pad at the exact same time.
And it just slowed me down a bunch more while other people were like...
She's never had the freedom to play at the level she knows she could.
I never thought it was unfair. I just thought, hey, this is the way it is and it's not going to change.
What I like about the adaptive controller is that now everyone can play.
I don't even have to look at the controller and just be like clicking at the screen like, hey, yep.
You never want your kid to feel like an outsider or an other.
One of the biggest fears early on is, how will Owen be viewed by the other kids? He's not different when he plays.
It's a little challenging, but that's the whole point of gaming.
I can hit the buttons just as fast as they can.
And I think I can crush my friends.
No matter how your body is or how fast you are, you can play. It's a really good thing to have in this world.
So I always like this tweet. That was our Super Bowl ad in 2019. It's hilarious. All those kids are all like, they were all like 11 and 12 when they shot this. And now they're all like 16 and 17. They'd probably be horrified that I'm showing this ad of them now. But this tweet came out right after the Super Bowl ad, and I really loved it. It's from dear Miss Hashim. She said, today we watched and rewatched and reflected on this Microsoft commercial with first grade. And here are some of their thoughts. Some kids cannot change. It doesn't mean they can't play. Microsoft did not want the kids to change, so they changed the remote. Yep, they nailed it. That's why we did it. That's kind of the whole deal. And that's really was a big kind of deal for us and how we sort of think about that work. One more thing I want to get into that sort of frames a lot of this, you know, while I did just show you the Super Bowl ad and there's a lot of kids in it, what people don't realize is we didn't design the adaptive controller for kids. We designed the adaptive controller for vets. In this article, we started with vets. We designed it for more than just vets. This article by Alex Miller is really great. It talks about how video games are saving those who served. And some of the things that people don't realize about vets is that veterans are 1.5 times more likely to commit suicide than the general population. And that was before the pandemic. And when you talk about people with disabilities and veterans who've been injured in service, that number is even higher. And Wired interviewed Ken Jones, who is a founder of Warfighter, who is the founder of Warfighter Engaged, which is a charity that we started with the adaptive controller. And Ken says, once those disabled veterans are able to get back into gaming, they'd come back with a positive attitudes towards therapy. Playing video games is a major plus for them. So many people are alive today because of these technologies. Many would have committed suicide otherwise. And what that means to us is we think about this like over the years, and as we've had time to sit with this idea, you know, we came to the conclusion, and we were aware of this at the time, but I don't think it was crystal clear. We created the adaptive controller for gamers with limited mobility, but we were inspired to support the mental health of the veterans that we partnered with. I think our conversations on mental health have, you know, accelerated incredibly over the pandemic. And, you know, it's important to kind of recognize those things. We made a game controller to support the mental health of veterans. That was why we did it. We happened to do it because they couldn't use a regular gaming controller, one that we designed. We created the barrier, right? So here are our principles of inclusive design from Microsoft. You can get them at that URL. I'm going to go through them in more detail. But at a high level, they're recognize exclusion, learn from diversity, solve for one, extend to many. So that first one, recognize exclusion. Let's talk about mismatches and interactions with game controllers. And this is a Minecraft controller. It's an Xbox One controller. It's an older picture. It's my daughter holding it. And one of the things that we had to recognize was that we created barriers unintentionally for gamers with limited mobility or different types of mobility by optimizing a device over many generations around certain aspects of how you would use it. And that's not bad. It's just you have to recognize it. So we assumed that when you use a game controller that you have 2 hands to operate it and 2 thumbs for the sticks, right? We make that assumption. We assume that people have the fine motor control to hit all those buttons. And sometimes game designers assume that people can hit those buttons simultaneously. We assume that people can have the reach to get around to those bumpers and triggers with those index fingers, right? That they're going to hold this thing and not place it on like a table or something. And then we assume that people are going to hold it. They're going to hold it for an extended period of time. They're going to have the endurance to be able to hold this thing and the strength. And what we had to recognize was that when any of those things weren't true for an individual, we created the controller. We had to own up to the fact that we created a mismatch in interaction. And so I think what's tricky about the adaptive controller, and I don't want to ever say that like we nailed it, because there's always things that we can do, and it's really exciting to see how other controller designers have tackled this problem. But we created a system that let people define a controller that they would use and gave them the tools to be able to do that. That could be any form. So we call it the adaptive controller, not because you adapt to it, but it adapts to you, right? That's why we think about it. So the next principle I want to get into is learn from diversity. Human beings are the real experts in adapting to diversity. Inclusive design puts people in the center from the very start of the process, and those fresh, diverse perspectives are the key to true insight. This is a very important principle. This is our nothing about us without us principle. Nothing about us without us is a saying that you'll often hear in the disability community. We strive to design with the community, not for. That's why we have the Inclusive Tech Lab. We can't design with the community if we don't have a place for them on the campus. So it was really important for us to have this home for them and to think about that. And so this is where we think about this in this principle. And for us with the adaptive controller, we did something that was really unheard of in hardware. We partnered with 5 charities from the very first prototype. We had 5 charities that had very first prototypes of the controller. And what I mean by that unheard of, if there's all kinds of stories about how secretive hardware development is, right? Like there's a story of some Apple engineer who left an iPhone 4 prototype in a bar and how big a deal it was. And the hardware industry is intentionally secretive. There's lots of reasons for it. Not all programs make it to actual market, so you don't want to announce something that might not happen. Microsoft did that actually a few years ago. We announced a device called Project Neo or Surface Neo, sorry. And that device never made it to market. And that's not something that we take that very seriously. So it's important for us to keep products confidential. But with this product, with the adaptive controller, we believed in nothing about us without us. So we worked with Able Gamers and the Cerebral Palsy Foundation and Special Effect and Craig Hospital and Warfighter Engaged, who I already mentioned. Now, Able Gamers is the biggest gaming accessibility charity in the US, and Special Effect is the biggest gaming accessibility charity in the UK. Warfighter was our partner from the very early beginning. And what's interesting about Able Gamers and Special Effect and Warfighter is they all have similar goals. They're all out there trying to get folks with limited mobility to play video games. All these photos are from Special Effect. But what they do differently is their operational models are different. Warfighter Engage builds custom rigs for people like soup to nuts. They basically, like, everything is custom. It's all done by Warfighter. It's all done specifically for an individual. Special Effect, because the UK is drivable, they can take an occupational therapist and a technician. They can put them in a car full of parts. They can come over to your house. They can set up a controller with you. If you ever need that controller to be updated, they'll come back. They'll take away the old stuff. They'll bring in new stuff. They don't give it to you. It's more of like they lend it to you. And then they take it back and then they bring it. But that's because in the UK, you can drive around the UK. You can do it, you can get in a car and kind of make the trip. Able gamers, in the US, you can't drive around the US, you can't, that's not effective. So Able Gamers has a grant program. They're much more about like, you talk to them about what you need. They give you a set of equipment. They mail it to you and, they support you remotely, but it's your equipment to keep. You don't have to give it back because there's no way for them to really intake it back. So it's much more of a grant program. That's how they approach that problem. And so when we created the adaptive controller, we had to support all of these operational models, right? And that was, that's why we worked with all these partners. That's why it was so important. Craig Hospital is a hospital that we work with a lot. They just have the added benefit of having a little bit more money because they're a hospital than a charity does. But they also have a very unique operational model in that they're a hospital. They're not trying to fundraise all the time. They're not trying to do things that charities have to do to like stay afloat. The Cerebral Palsy Foundation was a wonderful partner. They worked with us on how the device reflected on the individual. And so what I mean by that is, let's talk about stigma for a minute. Stigma in computing is something that's really interesting. What does using this device say about me, right? What does it project onto me? And that was something that was really important. And we would have always created a device that would have fit within the design language of Xbox. But working with the Cerebral Palsy Foundation showed us how important that was, how important it was for us to make sure that we weren't stigmatizing people by how it's used. Now, there's certain things that are unusual. So I don't want to say that we totally nailed that, because, even if you look at all these pictures, some of these things can be a bit stigmatizing, using things in your mouth or what have you. But you use what you can to do what you need to kind of do to have fun.
So this last principle, software when extending, everyone has abilities and limits to those abilities. Designing for people with permanent disabilities actually results in designs that benefit people universally. Constraints are a beautiful thing. So that's really important to us. This is the idea of how we think about reach and taking these ideas and expanding them beyond disability. But for us, we also look at this from a different angle. So this is a fellow that we work with. I haven't seen him in a while, actually. I haven't seen him since before the pandemic. But we worked with him at Harborview Medical, Seattle. He is what they would call a high tetraplegic. So he literally cannot move anything from his neck down. So sometimes people will say, well, I'm paralyzed from the neck down, but then they have slight arm movements. This guy does not. So, what we're setting up for him there is a mouse controller. That's Caitlin Jones, who is the principal at Warfighter Engaged and also an employee at Xbox, who is setting up that mouse controller for him. And what he will use that for is, I think we had him playing Rocket League. So he would drive the car around with the controller, with the mouse-operated controller. And he would basically, use that, there's a tube that's like a joystick. If he blew into it, that would be one button. So maybe that would be jump. And if he sucked on it, it would be another button. So maybe that would be boost, right? So that's how he kind of used that to play Rocket League. And that was all sort of empowered through the adaptive controller. This is another person that we work with. Their name is Terry Ray. And they have a condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And what it does is it makes your muscles really elasticy, so you lose a lot of strength. And they have trouble pressing the joystick buttons, or the joysticks as buttons. So in video games, if you're in controller-based video games, if you're not familiar, the joysticks move for analog movement, but you can also press them as a button. And so sometimes game designers will use those as two buttons. And if you have a critical function on it, like run, and you don't have the strength to press that button, it can be really limiting for you in the game. So what Cherry does, they use a feature that we have on the console called Copilot, and they copilot the two controllers to Xbox. And what this feature called Copilot does is it says it allows people to take two controllers and tell the system that they're one controller. So they can use these two things as one thing. And so what Cherry does is they remap those two big buttons to the problematic buttons that they have on the controller, which in their case is stick presses. And then they put the adaptive controller on their lap. And all they have to do is let their hands fall, and it presses those big buttons for the problematic buttons that they can't press with their thumbs. Right? So again, this is us thinking about modularity of input and how people can kind of adjust things to make it work. That's what they're doing. So to talk about these in context of what we just talked about, recognizing exclusion, we had to recognize that our traditional game controller was optimized around a primary use case and that had assumptions about how it was going to be used. And that when someone couldn't use the controller as we designed it, that the controller was the barrier. Right? That's the social model of disability. So learn from diversity. We've engaged across the gaming accessibility community, and we're giving insight not only into the functionality of the device, but how the form reflects on the user. And so that's really interesting as we start to think about taking accessibility devices and moving them into more consumer spaces, is that just to understand how stigma affects the product. This last one, software extended, we looked across all different types of disability and usability. And when we designed the device, but we also looked at who is actually supporting what here. And were you a gamer? Were you a caregiver for said gamer? Were you a maker? And the adaptive controller allows people to build a controller that fits them. That was how we intended the device. So I'm going to get into some design stories about the device because those might be fun for you. Just a little bit of the evolution of it and how we sort of thought about it. So these are some really early, these are some photos of some early mock-ups. These are some 3D printed sort of mock-ups. You can see that, in the first top one, we had the D-pad and the controller buttons in between the two buttons because it felt good at the beginning, but the problem was is that, you inadvertently hit those buttons as you traverse between the two buttons. So then we moved them to the right, we looked at them over there, they felt good, but at the same time, they weren't great. And you can see some of the things at the bottom where they were putting in pencil marks about rounding the corners. We had a lot of feedback from the partners that we worked with that the corners were too sharp and someone was going to drop it and get hurt. Another great piece of feedback was we had this, it was originally very boxy. And someone was saying that, when someone's going to lay their hands to press those buttons, that ridge is going to dig into their hands, and over a while, like over the course of a gameplay session, that'll cause them irritation. So we should slope it so that, people can kind of get at it. And that was a wonderful insight from the community. This is fairly close to the final form. You can see the corners are now rounded. I think why I have this one in here is to really show people, while it was super important to make sure that you could traverse between the buttons without having to have a lot of reach, you also needed to be able to traverse within that space and, traverse within that space and have places for your hand to rest.
So let's talk about the packaging of this for just a minute. The packaging team did a wonderful job, and I'm going to show you this video again. They've won many awards. They worked with the community extensively. One of the goals of and this packaging has changed how we've thought about packaging across our Microsoft products. It was a transformative project for the packaging team. It's wonderful, wonderful work. So yeah, let's go through that again, and I'll show you how this works. One of the guiding principles of the packaging was no teeth, because we saw a lot of people with disabilities using their teeth to open packaging. So I'm going to play this again. So there's a tape loop that has a hole in it. You can put in an appendage and yank out that one tape loop. Then the outer mailer just sort of falls apart. There's another tape loop that exposes a ribbon. Then you use that ribbon to kind of jimmy open the box where the controller is sitting on a card. The card also has a very familiar loop. You slide the controller out using that card. And underneath it, there is another card with the cable in there for the adaptive controller. Now, the card that the controller was sitting on is the quick start guide. So there is no tape other than what you've seen in this video. There's no tape, there's no twist ties, there's no shrink wrap. That is how the device is shipped and packaged. And, like I said, the team did a wonderful job, and they've won many awards for that packaging, and it continues to shape how we think about packaging today. So I want to give you some tips about some of this work based off of what I've learned. And I probably should update these, but I really do like them. So under recognized exclusion, it's important to remember that we all have biases, like we all do. And when you get told to check your biases, you should, but people need to recognize that checking biases is work. It's hard work. It's very difficult to say, hey, your life experience is not important here, and how do you kind of do that? So when you do that, so I always, when I taught my class, when I gave them this thing, the first thing I kind of had to tell them was like, you're going to go out and meet some people with disabilities. And they were like, we don't know anybody with disabilities. And I was like, too bad, you got to go find some. That's the rule number one. We strive to design with the community, not for them. There's actually a lot of bad things that can kind of happen when you design for the disability community. A lot of things with good intentions, but not necessarily bad or good results. One of those things is designing a wheelchair. This is a canonical example too, but designing a wheelchair that climbs stairs, right? Wheelchair users aren't asking for wheelchairs that climb stairs. They're asking for more ramps in society. So you're solving the problem in the wrong way. You're asking someone to assimilate to a norm instead of being more inclusive. And, that's not always the best way forward. So it's important to engage with people with disabilities to banish kind of unintentional exclusion. So I said you had to go meet somebody. Now, this next piece of insight is, let's say you've met someone. It is sometimes problematic to get all of your feedback from one person. It is often problematic. You wouldn't do this in other aspects of your product design or user research. You wouldn't sort of listen to one person's advice. So it is important to participate in communities and get feedback from multiple different people. I've seen many, a designer and engineer that are very senior in their career that would never take the advice of one individual in other aspects. Basically talk to someone with disabilities and then get feedback from them. And they're like, that's a great idea. I'll go do that. And I don't know if it's comfort or if it's a desire to do good. Either way, I know the motives are probably genuinely good. But I have to remind our engineers too, like, don't be swayed by someone. Like, listen to some people with disabilities, understand their needs, but you don't have to go do exactly what they say. And I think in many ways, you know, it puts this kind of stress on the community. In our original inclusive design video, there's a woman named Susan Goldsman who articulated this really well, which is collaboration is for identifying unmet needs, and it's not the responsibility of the community to articulate solutions. So you don't go to someone who's like, you know, a wheelchair user or someone who's blind and go, hey, tell me what to design. You're the designer. It's your job, not their job, right? Your job is to take their unmet needs, to understand their context of not only one group of people with disabilities, but multiple groups of people with disabilities, and synthesize those into elegant solutions. That's the designer's job. The designer's job is not to like go out and say, oh, here's a problem, here's a solution, here's a problem, here's a solution. We're not, I make fun of engineers. That's how engineers think, right? You know, problem, solution, instead of like, well, what are all the problems and how do we like kind of, you know, get multiple problems with one solution? And, you know, I believe that this approach leads to innovation and not just accommodation. Accommodation is this idea of like problem solution. But how do we actually kind of go beyond that? And I would be happy to take questions. If I can find my pop. Yeah.
How do you work with game designers to make games more inclusive? I think that's a big part of it.
Just a quick note for people who are asking questions. I know you all have lots of questions. Please introduce yourselves. Maybe give like a 1-sentence pitch on what you're working on, just to give a bit of context.
All right, my name is Dwight, and I'm working on something to guide my co-designers through brushing their teeth. Yeah. So I think game designers are tricky, and I think gaming accessibility has. Okay, I'm gonna try. This is gonna make me sound like an old man, which I totally am, and that's fine. You know, I was fighting for gaming accessibility when no one else was, like when there were very few people were, especially kind of in Xbox. You know, I don't think it's any secret that game design came from a place where game designers were designing their experiences for other game designers, right? You know, it was Shigeru Miyamoto who said in 2007 at GDC, when, you know, just before the Wii came out, and he said, and he challenged GDC to basically say, design a game that you might not play. And if you think about like where the Wii came from and all of that, you know, it really is like changing this idea of what games are. And we go back and forth all the time. You know, we do some brave things in gaming and then we kind of come back to the core, you know, and that's all super important. We don't want to abandon the core, but game designers are often the coriest of the core, right? You know, so what I mean by that is they're going to need a little bit more convincing. And we've got some great people in gaming accessibility, like Tara Volker, who works on Xbox, you know, who works with our game studios to go out and engage them and to get them to understand that they're not the customer. I think that's the biggest problem, you know, with game developers, is that you kind of, there's a saying in design, which is you're not the customer. But the problem is with game designers is they are the customer. From every metric of the aspect of the gaming industry, game designers are the best customers. They play the most, they buy the most, they use the most stuff. So you have to kind of convince them that they're not the only customer, right? And that's a different kind of aspect there. So we just go out and we show them examples, right? So that example that I showed you with Rocket League, where the guy would like had jump and boost, right? You know, I have all these people who are like, well, what about slide? What about this? What about this? What about all these other things that are in Rocket League that this guy can't do? And I turn around to them and I go, yeah, what about those? Like, you designed a game assuming that someone can hit 20 buttons. You know, why don't we talk about how do you design a game that is great for someone who wants to hit 20 buttons, but can be played by someone who can only hit 4 buttons? The difference between fun and mastery is something to think about. I think that's one of the things that game designers often assume, is that everyone, they assume that everyone wants to master their game, right? And that's not true. People just want to have fun. And I think, you know, understanding that difference is important. I hope that answers your question. And I would love to take another one. Thank you.
Not charging battery. 100%.
Good. Sorry, that was my other computer talking to me.
Hi, I'm Christian, and I'm working on a chairlift for my co-designer to help.
Yeah.
It's to help him get from different elevations and like from different like seat heights. But I play a lot of video games myself, but I'm more of a PC guy. And I have really jank keybinds.
I won't hold that against you.
Oh, okay. Well, I use Windows.
That's cool. Thanks, man.
Okay. Yeah, no, I have the most jank keybinds ever. And you know, people always flame me for it. Like I use F, V, and B for my weapons in every game instead of 1, 2, 3. And I was wondering, like, would there be an I don't know if you mentioned it, but like, would there be a way where people can switch like keybind profiles and stuff, like really quickly?
Lots of gaming keyboards let you do that, where you can change key binding keyboards by game. I don't know. Are you talking about changing key binding keyboards like within a single game?
Yeah, profiling just like in general. Like if you're playing like a certain character, like in Overwatch or something on the Xbox, and like certain characters, it's more crucial to hit certain buttons and like certain abilities. You think it would like, is there a point where you can have a profile switch button?
I mean, on the adaptive controller, we have 3 built-in profiles and we have a profile switch button. So we do have it on that device. I mean, it would shock me if there weren't gaming keyboards that also had profile switching. But I must admit, I'm a little bit out of date on what's my newest keyboard stuff. So sorry, I don't know if I can answer that one. I will tell you, we think about profile switching a lot. I mean, the canonical example of why we got profile switching on the adaptive controller was like, you're playing as Master Chief, you know, driving a Warthog is different than like shooting someone. You know, I totally want different key bindings for that. So yeah. That's cool. You're making a lift, huh? That's neat. Is that out of a wheelchair or just different elevations?
No, I'm taking an office chair and then I'm just gonna put a little hydraulic thing under it so it can just lift up and down.
Cool. Nice.
Oh, I just had a follow-up question to that real quick. Do you think there will be like any advancements where PC can be compatible with like the Xbox adaptive controller? Or is that?
Well, the adaptive controller works on PCs today. The adaptive controller is a game controller. I think one of the questions I get a lot from the disability community is they're like, well, I want to use a controller and a keyboard at the same time. And game designers understandably have a hard time with that. They have a hard time basically like, oh yeah. So Solomon here just handed me this Steel series, which we just happen to have in the back. And this has 5 remappable profiles on it that you can basically switch between. So that's cool. But yeah, as what I was saying about like, so the adaptive controller can work on PC games today as a game controller. It is no different than any other Xbox controller. But I get a lot of people who are like, well, I want to use the adaptive controller and a keyboard, and games don't like it when you go between controller and keyboard, right? They don't like it. So that's one of the reasons why we came out with the adaptive accessories, because it actually speaks keyboard. So you can do things with the adaptive accessories that you would do with a keyboard. Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, nice.
Hey, my name's Evan. I'm actually a TA for this program, and I just graduated from occupational therapy school. Thanks for the OT shout out earlier. Appreciate that. First off, I just would love to say thank you. This is actually my brother's controller, and I'm sure you've heard, 1,000 personal anecdote stories, but it was incredible getting to finally play video games with my brother, who just loves watching me, but finally got to be a part of it.
Hey, Evan, did you know about Copilot?
No, I didn't actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I get it. I just, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. Please go ahead.
No, please do.
Because I get a lot of parents, who will be like, I've got a son with disabilities or a daughter with disabilities, and they want to play video games with their siblings, right? Totally normal. And then the parents like, what kind of games can these siblings play? Like, or what kind of games can my kid who has limited mobility play? And I'm like,
don't get them to try to play baby games, because if their siblings are like out there playing Fortnite and Minecraft and you know, all the contemporary games, Overwatch, we just talked about Overwatch, they're not going to be happy with, like, you know, the Peppa Pig game that just came out on Game Pass or whatever. Not to slam on Peppa Pig, I'm playing that game right now, it's awesome. You know, that Peppa Pig game is really cool. So what's interesting about Copilot is I always tell these parents, you know, play with your kid, right? Like you've got multiple kids, right? So let's talk about playing some like local multiplayer or whatever, right? If your kid has limited mobility, can only hit 1 or 2 buttons or only use like 1 joystick, then give them the fun stuff to do, right? Give them aiming and shooting, right? And you do reloading and menus and running around, right? You be their co-pilot. And then inevitably some parent tells me, well, you know, I'm not into video games. And then I get to tell like them to get good, which is hilarious and at the same time toxic. You know, get good is not a very good thing to promote, but it's funny when I tell it to parents. But like, that's how we think about Copilot, right? That whole, you know, Copilot is, we call it Copilot because of that. So
for sure. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm definitely going to have to play around with that for sure. Cool. I had a quick question for you, if you don't mind. Yeah. So obviously you guys are, you know, sort of, and you talked about this a little bit, you know, you're sort of disrupting sort of the status quo of, you know, design through the years of trying to optimize for, you know, a two-handed player. I was just curious, like, what was the most difficult piece of disrupting that engine?
It really was trying to convince people that our beloved Xbox controller, which by the way is the greatest controller you can get, I'm not going to lie, you know, was the problem, right? And I think to this day we still teach that. Like, I mean, you know, not to be strange, but this is quite an old program for me, and I really appreciate that people still want to talk about it. But it does show that there's a need to kind of still talk about it, right? Like objects that are in our contemporary culture have significance, right? Like one of the things that I always think about a lot, let me give you an example. So this is our Surface pen, right? And this looks like a pen. Now, what do you do with pens, right? You write with pens, right? What if I told you you could click on things with pens, with styluses? You know, we all do this with iPads and whatever, right? But inherently, this device and the way that we culturally think about it is that it's a pen, use it to write. Now, if I called it a wand and not a pen, and I didn't have a tip on it, would you be more open to this thing doing more, right? It's still just a stick. But when I call it a pen, people are like, no, you write with pens. But if I called it something else, would people be more open to using it in different ways? These are all the things that we muse about. Don't worry, I'm not announcing a Surface wand. Panos would kill me. Oh my God. Yeah. But like these are the types of questions that we kind of ask, like object permanence, right? All that kind of stuff. Yeah, exactly. People there's comments that someone's tweeting this right now. The Surface wand. It's good. Just don't at me. So yeah, cool. So Evan, thank you. I'm glad you like the controller, and I hope it does well for your brother. And if you ever have any questions, just, you know, reach out. I can answer questions. Any other questions? I hope this was
yeah. So I'm Rita. I'm currently working on like sort of a portable hydration reminding bottle, and I'm also from Sammamish, by the way. And
oh, sweet.
Yeah. So
I live in
I guess
Sammamish.
yeah. So I guess my question is, like, after you guys release the adaptive accessories, like what are the next steps for what you're working on?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and I will tell you honestly that it's a pretty big challenge that we're facing. So with the adaptive controller,
you know, if you know, Evan's familiar with it. Some of you might not be familiar with it. You might be wondering, how the heck is this a game controller? Like, and I get it. I totally get it. Because again, that whole object permanence thing, like forms have power, right? So when we start to play around with the nature of forms, when we're talking about disability, we need to understand how people are going to kind of learn about this stuff. The one thing I always kind of tell people, like, you know, like, and with my colleagues in Surface, is like, no one has to explain what a laptop is, right? Everyone knows what a laptop is, right? But then I show up with like, here, just give me 1 second. Sorry, I'm gonna mess up your display. That's fine. So then I show up with like, so this is the adaptive accessories mouse, just the mouse core, right? And this looks like a mouse. But if I told you this was a mouse, which is, you know, our adaptive accessories button, you'd be understandably confused, right? But the thing is, I can make both of these into a mouse. And so where it gets tricky is like, and you know, the reason why this would be a good mouse is if let's say you have a tetraplegic and you've got someone who doesn't have a lot of finger movement and they just want to be able to hit this thing and move a mouse like this, right? Lots of tetraplegics use joysticks as mice. But the cognitive kind of leap that you have to make between this being a mouse, you know, and this being a mouse is significant. And so in many ways, we're making hardware. Lots of us are making hardware. We're making hardware here that's more like an API than it is like a product, right? We're giving you a set of tools that you can go out and build. And when you're building like an API, you need to support it. You need to provide samples. You need to provide tutorials. You need to give people context of how to build off this API. You can't just kind of like throw it out in the world and expect it to like work. And that's a new muscle that we have to build as a hardware team, because we're very used to like being able, you know, I think there's this idea in product design that if it's complicated, you failed, right? And I don't know if that's true, because our work is basically pushing against that idea of whether or not that's true. Because for us, human beings are complicated and we're trying to support them in a multitude of ways. And what we make isn't for everybody. Like, but when we think of our ecosystem of Surface products, we have lots of regular mice and keyboards and all that stuff that work great for the majority of people. We're just trying to fill in the gaps, right? So I hope that answers your question, Rena. Is there anything you missed in Sammamish? Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm there right now.
Sammamish right now? Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, just down the road.
Yeah.
Cool.
Hi again, Christian.
Hey.
I did have another question. You mentioned about mice,
yeah.
And have you ever seen like those? Okay, this might be a little bit I don't know. This might be a little unprofessional.
I've got lots of mice.
Okay. Well, speaking of mice, I have like 3 mice on my desk like right now. So, so would y'all ever consider for like accessibility for like the Surface Pro or something, like having like an eye tracker system for mice?
Yeah, so we work with eye tracking. We actually have built-in eye tracking in Windows. I think there's something that we can look at there. You're probably thinking about what Toby offers. And is it safe for me to assume that you're thinking about what Toby offers in gaming and like using eye tracking to enhance like precision and kind of that gross motor movement in gaming?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, like, so that works great. The guy that's laughing over in the corner throughout this thing used to work at Toby. You know, it's fine. He can laugh. But Toby started as a disability company to help people who cannot use their hands, and they extended to many by taking their technology and applying it to gaming. So they didn't start in gaming. They started in full cursor movement for people with no mobility by using their eyes alone. And they took that idea and they solved for one and they extended it to many by moving it into gaming.
So do we support that? Yeah, I mean, we support it on Windows through whatever they do. We also have built-in kind of eye tracking of our own to kind of encourage that ecosystem of eye tracking devices. Are you asking me, are we going to make an eye tracking device? I'm not going to tell you. Sorry. You know?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Christiana, and I'm currently working on a project for my co-designer, and it's the mother of someone who, my best friend's brother, who's on the autistic spectrum, and she needs to basically track a lot of the conversations that they've had, and so I'm just creating like a way to record that data in a accessible and simple way.
Nice.
And my question was, how do you, like, what is your user testing process? Because I guess like there's a way to create a controlled environment like where you are right now, but it's also a matter of like, do they bring it home and test it on their own devices and connect to their own personal devices at home?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question. And I used to have simpler answers. So with the adaptive controller, I get a lot of people that would be like, how did you test this, right? And I will tell you the reason why we talk about nothing about us without us, and we talk about with, not for, and a lot of that stuff is that if you're waiting until you're at a point where you want to test your product before you bring in the disability community, you've waited too long. Okay, so I really appreciate that you're working with someone, you're co-designing something. That's the right way to go. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't do testing, right? But with the adaptive controller, we didn't have to validate the ideas that we were trying to do. Because we did them with the community. We developed the ideas with the disability community, so we didn't need to validate if the ideas were useful, but we did do extensive user testing with like dozens of people with disabilities with all those charities to validate whether the execution of those ideas was correct. So that's kind of the difference, I would say, for us and how we think about that. So it sounds to me like you're on the right track by co-designing. I think, you know, if you wanted to find some more people, if you wanted to, like when I said, you know, don't just take one person's sort of opinion, you know, you can do that in the beginning to co-design, but then as you're developing the ideas, you do want to validate them with a number of folks. So is that it? Did I answer that okay?
Overall, yes. I think I was just wondering
Okay.
if user testing was also like a part, like done in the homes of people, like with their own personal devices also.
Yeah, I mean, right now, you know, we're post-pandemic. It's interesting. That's evolving, right? We're coming out of the pandemic. No, you're fine. I just realized I was you're fine. And we're coming out of the pandemic, and our greater user research team is coming back to the lab, right? My communities of people with disabilities are not ready to be post-pandemic yet. So I am still going to people's houses. I am still leaving devices at people's houses, right? Because they're not ready to like, and you know what? We don't know if they'll ever be ready to come back, right? It's very possible that people who can work remotely, you know, it's a great benefit for people with disabilities to be able to work remotely, that if I start asking people, hey, can you want to truck down to the Microsoft campus and like show up at a lab, that they'll just tell me, nah, you know, no thanks. And so we're going to learn as we like kind of evolve all this stuff. But yeah, I'm not afraid to leave devices at people's houses. I'm a little bit bad at getting them back, to be honest, but I could do better there.
Thank you.
Cool. This was fun, guys.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I think we really appreciate it. I certainly really appreciate your thoughts, and I think the students did as well.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, thank you so much.